History is full of twists and turns. But what if there's more to the story? I'm James Mackay, and on History Unfiltered, we dig deep into the moments that change the world, but often don't get told as they should. History is often told from a single perspective, but what if there's more to the story? Welcome to History Unfiltered. Hello, and welcome to History Unfiltered, the podcast where we dig deeper into the untold stories of the past, question the mainstream narratives, and hopefully have a little bit of fun along the way. I'm James Mackay, and today we're exploring a pivotal movement that shaped the world, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. But before we dive into the conversation about the fall of the wall, let's rewind and understand why this wall was built in the first place and just how massive and fortified it really was. The Berlin Wall was more than just a physical structure. It was a stark reminder of the ideological division between East and West during the Cold War. Built by the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, in 1961, the wall was an attempt to stop the massive outflow of people from East to West Berlin. This migration, fueled by the promise of freedom and prosperity in the West, was devastating to the East German economy and legitimacy. The government sought to present what they called brain drain, as skilled workers, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens fled to the democratic and capitalist West. The wall itself ran a total of 96 miles in length, with 27 miles cutting through the heart of Berlin. It wasn't just one wall, but two. These were separated by a 160-foot wide death strip. This was heavily guarded with 302 watchtowers, 259 dog runs, and 20 bunkers. Between them were 55,000 landmines and machine guns activated by tripwires. The wall itself ranged from 11 to 15 feet high, designed to physically and symbolically divide the city. This wasn't just a border, this was the actual Iron Curtain, the physical and ideological boundary that separated the Soviet-controlled communist states of Eastern Europe from the capitalist West. It was a symbol of the deep geopolitical divide that characterized the Cold War and reflected the larger conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States, which played out not just in Europe, but across the globe. Families were torn apart, and a generation of East Germans grew up under constant surveillance, with little access to the outside world. The wall became the ultimate representation of the oppression and the harsh realities of life behind the Iron Curtain. Now we've got that out of the way, let's fast forward to that monumental moment in history, November the 9th, 1989, when the world watched as the wall came down, marking the beginning of the end for the Cold War. I think it's fair to say that the Berlin Wall's fall is indeed a defining moment in modern history. And on November the 9th, 1989, the world witnessed the collapse of a barrier that had divided families, ideologies, and a continent for nearly 3 decades. But have you ever wondered, what if the wall had never fallen? How would that have altered the course of history? Hopefully you find it a fascinating question as much as I do. I think if the wall had remained, it's likely that East Germany would have continued as a communist state for a much longer period. The momentum for democratic reforms might have been delayed, affecting not just Germany, but the broader European landscape. This very scenario has been debated extensively by scholars. In fact, historian Frederick Taylor suggested that without the wall's fall, the Cold War could have still persisted, with East Germany remaining under Soviet influence, potentially delaying the German reunification and altering NATO's dynamics. And whilst that's a compelling point, the economic disparities between East and West Germany might have also widened. The West's market economy would have flourished, while the East's centrally planned economy struggled, leading to increased migration pressures from East to West. And I think culturally too, the divide would have also deepened. The East Germans had limited access to Western media, technology and freedoms. This cultural isolation might have led to a more pronounced generational gap in perspectives and even aspirations. Moreover, the European Union's expansion might have also taken a different trajectory. Without a unified Germany, the EU's integration process could have been a lot slower, affecting policies, economic collaborations, and the overall vision of a united Europe, something that was so important to Winston Churchill. And whilst that's quite an insightful observation, I think the ripple effects would also have been global. For example, it would have certainly affected US foreign policy and NATO strategy, and perhaps even relations with countries like Russia could have evolved very differently, all stemming from the continued existence of the Berlin Wall. I think that's a testament just to how pivotal moments like the fall of the Berlin Wall can have a cascading effect across politics, economics, culture, and international relations. And whilst we can only speculate about these kind of alternate histories, it's clear that the wall's fall was a catalyst for change, propelling the world towards a new era of cooperation and unity. I think also it's a reminder for the resilience of people yearning for freedom and the lengths they'll go to achieve it. I think with looking at that, you've got to talk about the very human stories behind the wall. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. There were families torn apart, lives disrupted, and the incredible efforts that some of them went to actually escape East Germany. Perhaps one of the most extraordinary aspects of this particular story is how people risked everything to cross that border, sometimes with nothing but a glimmer of hope for a better life. And whilst there was a physical wall, it was also an emotional one which separated loved ones. In many cases, entire families were divided overnight, fathers, mothers, and children, unable to communicate or even see each other. But despite those dangers, there were many daring escape attempts from East to West Germany, and some of those stories are truly remarkable. When researching for this particular episode, one of the most fascinating and frankly unbelievable escape methods actually involved people using modified cars. I know it's hard to imagine, but some escapees found very creative ways to smuggle people across the border using nothing more than the vehicles they drove. One of the stories comes from a man named Manfred, who lived in East Berlin. Manfred and his friends used a specially modified car to sneak people through the checkpoints, including Checkpoint Charlie. The car, a Volkswagen Beetle, had been cleverly altered. The floorboards were cut open and hidden compartments were built underneath the vehicle, just big enough for a person to hide in. I don't particularly want to imagine it because I am somewhat claustrophobic, but just imagine crawling into a tiny space underneath the car, knowing that a simple mistake, a sneeze, a cough, could lead to death or imprisonment if you were found. It must have been an absolutely terrifying experience. But I suppose for many, the risk was worth it. The escapees would hide in these compartments, sometimes for hours, as the driver passed through multiple checkpoints on the way to West Berlin. It was a carefully coordinated operation, because the drivers had to be familiar with the border guards' routines and avoid suspicion, which was no easy task given the amount of security that was there. And whilst this was just one story, it wasn't just a few people. Thousands of them were desperate to escape, and many turned to innovative, dangerous methods to do so. There were people who used all sorts of different things like hot air balloons, secret tunnels, and some of them even tried to swim across the cold waters of the Berlin River, all in the hope of gaining freedom. I also came across particularly touching stories of people who were separated. One of them was a lady called Erika who was separated from her fiancé Thomas in the 1960s. Thomas lived in West Berlin and Erika was stuck in the East. They weren't allowed to cross the wall to see each other, but they did manage to stay in touch through letters and occasional visits when Erika was able to cross into West Berlin through a loophole. Eventually, after years of trying, Thomas found his way to smuggle Erika across the wall, hidden in a compartment in a van this time. When she finally made it to freedom, they were reunited, and the emotional toll of these years left an indelible mark on them both. And the wall didn't just affect individuals, it destroyed entire communities. There were cities and towns where families lived on either side of the wall for years, and in many cases people could see their relatives through the wall, but could never touch them, speak to them, or hug them. There were even instances of families trying to shout across the wall to each other, communicating as best they could, but that physical barrier always kept them apart. I guess it's hard to fully grasp how profound and painful that must have been. The Berlin Wall is often remembered as a symbol of oppression, but behind that concrete structure were personal stories of struggle, sacrifice, and the powerful human will to be free. And I'd imagine that's why when the wall finally fell, the emotional outpouring from the people of Berlin and the world was so overwhelming. It was not just a political event, it was the end of a long, dark chapter in history. The Berlin Wall's collapse wasn't just the tearing down of a physical structure, it was the liberation of millions of people and the reunification of families that had been separated for decades. Well, there you have it. I think we've all learned a little bit more about the Berlin Wall and its fall in 1989. I'd like to say thank you all for listening and tuning in to History Unfiltered. We'll be back next time with more untold stories and hidden truths. And until then, remember, history isn't just black and white. It's a story that's still being written. Join us next week on History Unfiltered.